everybody, Jerry Rasco here with you, and I have kind of a cool and interesting different kind of video for you today. Um, I follow a bunch of different groups on social media that have to do with comic book art, um, professional, amateur, all kinds of stuff. And I saw this post yesterday, I think it was, from a gentleman who posted in a group called How to Draw Comics, and I really liked what he was doing. I thought there's some great stuff there, and I reached out to him and asked if he was open for critiques because I love what's going on here, and I think with a couple of tweaks and a couple of little tips, this guy could really take what he's doing to that next level. I thought he did a great job. So first, I want to give credit. Gentleman's name is Rodney C Jacobsen. He's done a fantastic job, and this what we're going to look at are some finished pencils that he posted, which I think are just kind of either practice, maybe samples, because they're Marvel characters. But it does look like, according to some of his posts here and stuff, it looks like he has done some indie work, essentially self-published through an indie publisher called Valor Comics with a friend of his. So looks like they're available on Amazon. You can check out those books through Valor Comics. Looks pretty cool. So again, all props to Rodney C Jacobsen and what we're about to look at. But again, this is a great. Hopefully, he gets to see it and he likes it, and then anybody else who's at this stage of drawing and penciling can see what we're talking about here in the how some very small subtle differences, little tweaks can really take you to that next level. So I just want to show you again, these are my thoughts as an artist, somebody who I've been working in comics, in indie and self-published comics for a number of years now, and as well, I do have a background in art education, so that's where the idea where I'm coming from. So, without further ado, let me show you what I'm looking at here and what I've done in regards to sort of overlaying and showing to help emphasize what I want to talk about. So as we see, this is here. Let me shut this off, and you can see the original. So these are very tight, very finished pencils of the X-Man Colossus fighting the Juggernaut. So we have this first piece, which I would guess if you were again if you're doing it for a comic, it based on the ratio, the size ratio, would be like a double page spread as a way to start because it's more horizontal than vertical. Great. Love the lighting. Love the energy. The pose is terrific. The musculature is terrific. So I want to just start with any of my critiques are on top of that, right? So everything here is about the more complex or, like I said, maybe like next step element. So all the basics are here. Again, great storytelling, composition, the lighting is pretty for the most part is pretty consistent, and the anatomy is terrific. So let me go ahead and start turning on some layers and talk about the things that I think that could be done a little differently. So the first part you see here is I overdrew or overlaid a bigger outline for this figure. There's a couple of reasons that I did that. One is he is supposed to be in the foreground. And we know that because he's overlapping the character in the back and he's overlapping all the rocks that are in the center here, right? Or on the bottom. So in order to make that character look more forward to us, he needs to be larger. And the reason is there's nothing besides the two figures for scale. So because the Juggernaut is such a massive character, it kind of skews our perspective because he's so big, but he's behind him, but that makes the figure look more forward, right? Bigger things are closer, smaller things are further away. So again, it skews it. You don't want the Colossus figure to look like they're the same size. And where that would come into detail are things like you see here the Juggernaut's face, his mouth, his eyes are going to be smaller. The details, the fine lines are going to be smaller. You would use bigger, larger lines. Colossus would have larger features, as well as the extra overlapping is going to show that he is closer to us. So that's going to help create some space and some scale. So that's one of the things that I would do. As well, the other thing is it's going to help to clear up what is all this dead space up here. Now, maybe they left it there on purpose for dialogue, but we don't know that there's any dialogue associated with this. So for the time being, we're going to assume it's relatively silent. And this is, if we take away my overdrawing, this is a lot of empty dead space here in the background. Now again, great if you have a word balloon and a word balloon, terrific. You have the space for it, but we're working assuming that's not the case. Okay. So let's see. Let me go back. Get rid of those yellow lines. Okay. So then the other thing that making Colossus a lot bigger is also going to help this awkward angle. It's not really a tangent, and a tangent is where two different lines from two different things essentially line up perfectly, and it makes it look like one thing. And so with these lines here, there's just something about it. It looks a little off, and I don't. Again, it's not a true tangent. Maybe it's because this blue line here kind of lines up where the belt is, and this comes down into where that muscle would be, sort of. But it's just a little awkward. So I pointed that out just so you can see there's something about that that's a little bit different. If I make Colossus bigger, now that line doesn't quite line up perfectly with the other parts of his body. We have more of him up above it. That helps with that somewhat. So that was the second thing that that I was pointing out. Another way to fix that is to take the Juggernaut's arm and pull this arm back. So this arm is kind of down, but the elbow is cocked backwards. Same thing here. If instead of dropping that arm and imagining there's a whole fist behind Colossus that we can't see, instead I'm suggesting you use foreshortening to show that fist here. Now you have fingers with separate lines and textures, and the overlapping of that arm again helps to break up the shapes and create more distance. That so Colossus is in front of the hand, which is in front of the bicep, and that creates different levels of depth. So that would be something that you could do again to help space the two characters apart in space. Now, this is about lighting. So for the most part, it looks like, you can see from the Juggernaut and all the shadows to Colossus and where the shadows are on him, parts of him are overlapping each other and casting shadows. So the light is coming from up above and down. Could be more straight, could be at an angle, but definitely from above up here. That's why there's this reflection on Colossus's head, all this stuff. This is all highlight because the light is hitting these things. The reason I drew this is because all the rocks in the bottom of the page are all shaded in black. So I get it. This is a pencil piece. I'm working under the assumption that this is being drawn to ink and to make essentially a comic book page, right? That's the reason you would do this, and the reason you would draw comic book characters. So if you shade in those rocks, that tells an inker make that black. And I get it. The idea is he's trying to shade in that area to pop out the figures and separate them with dark and light. The problem is it doesn't make sense from the light. Where the light hits these rocks, they wouldn't be shadowed black. They might be colored darkly, depending on the the colorist choices, but they wouldn't necessarily be shadowed because there's nothing actually above them casting a full shadow. So what I did was say, here, if I have the light, this is where the light would strike some of these rocks, and then that way you have more of a light and a dark side. And by shading them, instead of just shading them all black or all dark all the way across, if you add light on one side and shadow on the other, again, anything like that, the dark side goes deeper back, the light side comes forward, the dark side goes back, and then you end up with more depth. And it's all about creating the illusion of depth. So that's what I would do with the lighting on those rocks. Is I would keep it consistent with what you've already done in the figures, because the lighting on the figures is so good. And then the last thing is in the background. So this will come into play in the next page, you'll see. But again, we have all this dead space. You'll see in page 2, they are fighting amongst some buildings, and there's a truck in the background that plays a very important role in the next page. So I would hint at that truck. What that does, again, if you look without it, there is no depth. There is nothing in the back. There is no horizon line. There is no city. There is no nothing. So essentially, the way this is drawn, your world ends kind of right here. There's nothing behind that. There's nothing further back than that. The most far back thing we see is his foot, and his foot is pretty much just about on that line or lifting off that line. So that's it. But yet past that, there is really nothing else. I guess the smoke, but that's it. So again, what I'm suggesting is you don't have to draw every detail. Give a hint of the buildings. Could be done in shadow, could be done with just some basic shapes, and a hint of that truck, because you're going to need it in page 2. So speaking of page 2, let's go to page 2 and let's look at that. And now you can see we have multiple panels. And again, this is what made me assume that this is being drawn in a comic book format for a particular reason. So we have Colossus swings the pipe that had a big chunk of concrete on it, or whatever rock, and uses it as a bat to hit the Juggernaut. Awesome movement, swing, looks like really referenced a real powerful baseball kind of swing. Really good. I like the motion lines are fantastic to give us that sense of energy. The way the smoke trail or dust, from this, because he's hit him and it's swinging back around that way, trailing, fantastic. We also have some pieces of rubble that are overlapping. Excellent stuff. All very, very good. Here's, again, some slight changes that I would do. And again, I think this applies to a lot of the stuff. So what I would point out here, again, is what is, let me get to the right place. What is all this extra space over here? Looks cool with the motion lines. That's great. And terrific if you have dialogue. But what is it? Right now, it's just empty space. Everything is very heavy to this side. Your figure is dead center, and there's nothing over here. So I would recommend bring something over here. So what I'm suggesting is move Colossus over, maybe not as far as I did, but I wanted to be able to be clear to be separate. Move Colossus over, same pose, same swing, same all that stuff. That's terrific. Okay. Now what that allows us to also do, well, I'll put both, is bring the Juggernaut figure over further, because really all we get is this little sliver, little bit of a mouth, one eye, very little of the figure. It's so foreshortened that, because this is all the room we have, really limiting the sense of him being punched or hit, and and all that mass and force being blown off so into another direction. So it really limits the storytelling and what you're trying to emphasize, which is so great in all this. So my suggestion is use the page, move this over, give more of the juggernaut, and now we get a real sense of this guy's really getting walloped and flying towards the viewer, flying towards the camera. In fact, I've even suggested I would overlap a little bit. We know that there's a pipe in his hand. We can see it. It was in the previous page, and it's all the way through here. So you could overlap that a little bit. And again, that overlapping with something really large in the foreground and something smaller in the background really helps create that sense of depth. This is much, much closer. Even his head is much bigger than his leg, which is much bigger than the pipe in Colossus's hand and his arm. That really creates a sense for us of the scale and the space. So I would recommend doing that. You also get much more. You have two eyes, mouth area for the Juggernaut to really give that cool expression. Great, because it's again, you did such a good job. Don't limit yourself to this little sliver of the page. And then the last thing is, again, let's cut back to the beginning here. There's no horizon line. There's nothing behind this rubble. It's as if it's floating in space. There's nothing over here that suggests an edge. There's nothing back here to suggest that behind him is anything substantial. So I am recommending that you do that. Now you don't have to draw a whole bunch of buildings and things. You can still go with the speed lines. All I'm suggesting is put some rubble, this rock, metal, etc., that goes behind him but up higher. And what that does is create that sort of background layer so we know how far back this goes in space. And especially here, like the speed lines right now basically go through space, and so this isn't ground anymore. This is just empty space, right? Because this is open. These go in open space, and the lines are down here, so that's all just open space, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's what I would do in the first panel. The second panel is the Juggernaut's flying back from the dark into the light, where to emphasize the impact into this truck. And that's where I suggested again, this truck was going to come into play, so I suggested hinting at it in the first page. That way it's not a surprise, because so far, if you just look at without this, Juggernaut's running at him. There's nothing in the back. There's nothing. We have no idea where they are. They could be in a cave. They could be on an island. They could be anywhere. And then all of a sudden on page 2, now there's a truck. Where did the truck come from? Right? How did it get there? So I'm recommending hinting at that in the first page. Then I am suggesting, let's see, here we go, that you show a little bit of the Juggernaut, maybe his feet and his hands, because he's impacting into the truck. I want to show a little bit of him coming out and hitting it. So that we know, just because not everybody, you have to assume sometimes that people don't read comics as much as the rest of us maybe, or haven't for their whole lives, that it's the Juggernaut that's hitting this. So you want to show maybe his hands, his feet, and which means that, right, the rest of his body is in here. And it gives a sense of scale. How big is he compared to this truck? If his hand and feet are sticking out or that big, that helps in the next panel when he's coming out of the wreckage. So I really like this. I like the impact on the truck and how it's shifted. The details of the truck are great. All that is terrific. Again, just a slight detail helps clarify some storytelling beats. And then for here, all I really recommended is helping to clarify what's what. we can see the Juggernaut as a figure. There's some, looks like paper kind of floating in front of him, settling. There's, I guess these are boxes that were inside the truck. We kind of see them in the second panel, so that's what I'm assuming. But if you look at, let me turn that off. If you look at the boxes, the lines on the boxes and the shadow and the shading of the boxes, and then some of the lines around the edges, it's hard to tell that they're different. But I'm assuming that these edges here, this and this, are the metal of the truck that he's been knocked through, and that's what this is in the background. This sort of tattered is supposed to be more shredded metal, whereas this is, the boxes are supposed to be, I guess, shredded paper or shredded cardboard. They have to be drawn differently. You can't use the same textures and the same kind of hatching or lines rendering to do both, because it's very hard to tell the difference. So I kind of recommended, like, hey, put a thick edge on the metal part here, um, so that you can tell that it's metal that had a thickness that he's gone through. Um, the other thing I might do, and I didn't really note it until right now, but this, you've got this edge here. This is definitely what you would call a tangent. This, I think it's supposed to overlap behind, but it looks like it just ends together. I might even overlap the metal in front of him. Um, Again, just sort of helping to emphasize the point that he's going to be coming out of this truck that he was knocked into. So I might do something like that. It's a small piece of it, but it's just enough to put this in the front and him slightly behind. So um, that's the suggestions for page 2. And so what happens on page 3? So on page 3, we get a close-up of, oops. So I drew this on the background. We get a close-up of Colossus gritting his teeth, looking at the Juggernaut. And again, what I pointed out over here is, what is all this empty space for? Again, dialogue bubble, cool, but I don't know that there's dialogue. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. And dialogue can cover up stuff. So from an artist standpoint, I tend to work, I might leave this space, but I might draw something unimportant behind it, with the concept that it could be covered by a dialogue bubble, and I'm not upset. So I suggested, maybe I'd put smoke here, right? There's been a lot of clearly smoke, or maybe some of that paper is still settling to the ground, or something to that effect. Um, the other thing, the white, is lighting. So the lighting is definitely coming in this direction. We know that because of the highlights on his metal hair. The highlights are on this side. Under his eyebrow area is shaded. That makes perfect sense. Down here is dark. Under his chin is dark. Kind of in this area, and under his neck is dark. Perfect. Inside his ear, dark. So the light is coming from this way to this way. However, that means that this side of his nose probably isn't going to have highlights. It's going to be more dark. Underneath the nose, if the light is coming this way, is going to be dark. And then same thing if the light's coming down. So it's great to think that it's coming this way, but we know that light kind of goes in a lot of directions. If it's coming from top. And my computer locked up on me. Oh, no, we're back. Okay. So if the light's coming from the top down, it's coming from the top down, but it's coming from this way, this way. You can see on me, for example, it's slightly darker. I'm casting a shadow onto my chest because the light's coming down from above, but it's not just coming, even though the light source is actually over here a little bit. There's also light from the window over here and all that. So anyway, if the light's coming from the top, I suggest it just be consistent with your lighting. He's going to be reflective because he's all metal. On the top part, there's going to be shadows on the bottom part of his muscles. So just be consistent with that. And then the last part here is, and I wish I hadn't I had drawn on the background. I had done it on a layer, but I did it on the background by mistake. But his teeth are kind of going in the wrong direction a little bit. So your teeth wrap. Let me see if I can just sort of explain. So in this particular, so if you have a skull, pretend this is a skull, the teeth wrap in a like an arc around top and bottom, right? So in perspective, if I'm looking straight at it, or if I'm looking, let's say, you know, if I'm looking from the top down, the teeth are going to go like this, right? This is the top of the skull. If I'm looking from underneath, they would go more like this. This is the nose, there's the eye, that's right under your chin. So they're going to go in a circle. So in this case, I can see the bottom of his nose. I can see underneath his eyes. That means I'm looking from down up. And if I'm looking from down up, your teeth are going to go in more of like that. So all I'm suggesting is just curve that mouth that way a little bit. That would follow. Here he has it kind of going up. So your lips can go up or down, but your teeth are always going to follow the shape of your skull. So if you're looking straight, it's going to be relatively straight and curving back into space. If you're looking up, they're going to go that way, down the other way. So that is that. Panel 2. Cool shot here. Juggernaut is coming in, both hands over his head. He is looking to smash things, Hulk smash style. Very cool. What I think the artist is going for here is kind of a sort of worm's eye view combined with a fisheye view. So worm's eye view means just like you would think, you're at the ground level or below even, and you're looking up at, we're looking up at the figure. So that's why things in the low are going to be much larger, and we're looking up, and it's going to be smaller going up. And then fisheye means that everything, if you look at a fisheye lens on a camera, everything is sort of bends towards the center. And I think that's kind of what he was going for, but I would really emphasize it even more. I'd make that everything here, the horizon, much rounder, really emphasize that. Bend these buildings in to match. Whereas if you can see here, without it, the buildings are sort of square, but this one is starting to lean in, so it's sort of a weird mix of perspective. If you're gonna do a perspective shot, which is in this case, things at the ground are closer and wider, and things going up are going away from us, so they're going to go up and away, right? Like that. Then you have to be consistent and do it with everything. And that's kind of what's going on here. So again, I'm recommending really emphasize that. And if we're at a fisheye view looking up, we would see the bottom of the Juggernaut's boot. So so here I'm looking down, I can see the top of it right here, and I can't see the bottom. And I can see the top of his knee, which means I'm looking down at it. And I am suggesting, no, you're really down lower. You would see the bottom part. You wouldn't see the edge on the top. And I would move that knee up because I'm not going to see the top of the thigh. I'm actually going to see underneath the bottom of the thigh. And then you've got the rest of your figure. So again, that's a very tough shot with your perspective. Some people would grid it. So when I say grid it, what I mean is, use a different color and kind of give you an example. Right, you would take a ruler, measurements, and figure out, how small did things get up here versus how big are they down here. So you're doing this. Everything is going this way to a vanishing point that's up here. All these lines would eventually meet 100 million miles up in the sky, right? And then, and things get bigger as they get closer down to the ground. And then you would follow that perspective for, again, your buildings, stuff like that. Worm's eye view and fisheye view, very difficult perspective shots to pull off, but pretty close here. The other thing I would say is, oh, the fire hydrant. I recommend making that a little smaller. As it is here, it's pretty big. I mean, if you figure the Juggernaut is like a, I don't know, 12-foot tall guy, and this thing is bigger, than his foot, that's a really, really big fire hydrant. And then the last part is just a little more attention to the buildings. The buildings are okay, but other than a few lines, you could tell like this one was drawn with a ruler, maybe that one. They're a little kind of made up, which is all right. It wouldn't be a bad idea to sort of, check out some buildings, make sure you've got the stonework right. But all in all, really ambitious panel here. I like it. With a couple of tweaks, it's excellent. Um, the next one over here, so the Juggernaut has his hands up, and then he brings them smashing down and basically smashes through the earth, and Colossus falls through the hole. There's two big things that I had here. One is, let's see if we can find it. No, which layer is it on? There we go. So these lines, again, anything you shade solid with a pencil says fill in black. And I would never do motion of something moving through the air with a solid black line. Now, um, if, for example, I wanted to show the motion in the previous panel where his arms, let's pretend I want to show that his arms are moving up, one of the things you can do is you could take lines, say from like these bands on his arm, and you would draw these, and the colorist would color them in the same color, almost like a motion blur on a camera. So if I move my shirt really fast, if I could move fast enough, which I can't do anymore, I would be a maroon blur because the maroon is moving fast. So you could do that, or you could do it with his skin tone. Most of the time, what we do in comics is it's through the air. So you would leave this as white with motion lines inside. So I would never shade the motion in as solid black. It doesn't read as his fists are coming down. It it reads as a solid object maybe, or something like that. So it's just a little weird. Um, and then the other part is, if you look, he's very straight. So we could tell like the idea is that he's supposed to be really hunched over, right, reaching down, which you understand because his back is much higher than the back of his head, which is fine. It should go like that. There's because your spine is here, so this should be up a little higher. But again, no big deal. It's cartoons. It's a giant guy. I'm okay with that. Um, but it doesn't. This all reads as very, very straight up and down. There's no curve going forward with his spine per se. How do you do that? You do that by making his waist and his back, the lower part of his back higher and this part much smaller because it's rotated forward. So we're not going to see as much of these muscles, and then that would help create the illusion that he's going forward as opposed to just going like this. And if he's just going like this, his hands won't reach the ground. So he has to go forward. And by doing that, you've got to roll that back and roll those shoulders up. And then we have the last page. So Colossus is falling through the ground. And as I mentioned, all throughout the video, I really like what's going on here. Great work, great idea on the foreshortening. There's a little bit that I'll go over that could be fixed. I like the overlapping of some of the rocks and stuff. Very good. The smoke falling through. But again, I ask, what is all this space for? It's terrific. We see rocks. That's fantastic. but this is a lot of space for nothing. And this is all super valuable real estate when it comes to comics. So what would I do? So I would, oops. So first, let me do this. Let's pretend if we leave everything as is, here are a couple of things that I would fix with Colossus. So on the, it's very subtle, but on the foreshortening is when something is coming at the camera, so it looks shorter than it is, right? So if you measure this on screen, it might only be a couple of inches on screen, but we know that my arm is much longer than that because it comes at you, it's blocked. Part of it is blocked by my finger, by my hands, etc. So this is called foreshortening. And this is how you show things coming at you in two-dimensional space to make it look like three-dimensional space. Okay, and that's what he's doing here. The problem is he's showing everything. So I could see almost the whole bicep, the whole shoulder, the whole tricep, the elbow. There are some things that need to be essentially covered up. And that's what I've put here. So I cover more of the bicep with the forearm by doing that, as well as the tricep is going to go back in space. This is going to cover more of the shoulder, and then you're really seeing the forearm and the hand. So you're going to see much less of this arm and shoulder. Also, he has the clavicle or collarbones kind of going straight, but the shoulders are hunched up. We can tell because it's coming almost from his ear level and or actually behind. So it's twisted and up. And so by doing that, if you do this with your shoulders, you can feel your collarbones go up and down because they're connected up here at the top of your shoulder. So these have to go up into more of a V there. Okay. So that's just a few, again, nitpicky stuff. The figure itself is really good. Again, very dramatic and very ambitious pose to go with. But that being said, how do you fix all this space? I make Colossus a lot bigger. So, and I put it to the side. I might even center it up, but I moved it to the side because it's hard to see if I draw directly over where all that pencil work is. Um, but I would make him much bigger. So you can see I can make the figure bigger and take up a lot more space and still have that foreshortening. So he's still coming at me. He's still falling, and then I start adding in my rubble, making sure that there are real big chunks in the foreground that overlap him. Again, creating multiple layers of depth. The more things you have in front of each other, the more layers you have, and the further back your depth looks. So like this covers this. So there's one. You have, and of course there's the foreshortening. His hand covers his forearm. So if I put a rock that also overlapped his hand, let's say, then the rock's in front of his hand, the hand's in front of the wrist, the elbow and forearm is in front of the bicep's in front of the shoulder is in front of the chest is in front of the legs. You see what I'm saying? So right there, and then now there's a rock that's behind him. I've created lots of layers of depth to help create that illusion. So that's what I would do, and just like I said, to tweak those pages just a little bit, but really, overall, uh, Rodney did an amazing job. These pages are phenomenal. Um, I really like I really like the work. This pose is awesome. It's really cool. His Juggernaut is amazing. He looks intimidating. The musculature is perfect. The lighting is excellent. Um, I really like what he's doing. If I was an inker, other than a few, like I said, there's a couple things where I'd go, is this am I inking this or am I leaving this for a colorist? It's clear. It's very clean. Um, Really, really great style. Like I said, there's just a couple of small things that I would personally recommend tweaking that would get you to, maybe professional gig, as opposed to self. There's nothing. Listen, there's nothing wrong with self-publishing. I've self-published my own comic. I am a big believer in it. If you have your thing, do your thing. It's the way to go for sure. But if your goal is to maybe draw X-Men or draw something for Marvel or DC or or another company, this stuff could get you there with just a couple tweaks. So if you're at this kind of point, if you feel like, hey, I'm looking at this guy's pencils and I see some of these things in myself, maybe here's some opportunity for you to go ahead and make a couple of little changes that could help you out and maybe again take your stuff to the next level. So thank you all. I really appreciate you checking out the video. I hope it's been helpful. Again, thanks to Rodney C Jacobsen for letting me critique this. He did, like as I mentioned, he posted this in the How to Draw Comics page on Facebook or group on Facebook. I think he posted it to his own page as well. If you like this work and you're on Facebook, I would recommend seek him out. Take a look at his stuff. I think I think he's still working on this story or this sample, and I think there's some more. Part of the next page is up, so give him a follow. Tell him what if you like his stuff, and enjoy. Thank you all, and we'll talk to you again on the next video.